So I have to preface this by saying that Edge, the rated R superstar, and Randy Orton, the apex predator, the Viper, they are the two favorite wrestlers of mine of all time. So when Edge returned at the Royal Rumble and Randy Orton shared the ring with him, it was the temporary rated RKO in-ring reunion. And they were working together, and they were in the last four. It was a complete fanboy moment for me, because it's not 2006 anymore, but it felt like it. And that's what wrestling does. That's why the nostalgia is such an important factor with everything that happens. And you had the amazing return story of Edge going into the match, and then Edge turned on Randy Orton, threw Orton outside the ring, made it to the last three, got eliminated by Roman Reigns, and then Drew McIntyre won. It was perfectly booked. Edge didn't need to win. McIntyre went on to bigger, brighter things after that. He still is. He's the champion as of this recording. But the biggest beneficiary from the return of Edge, aside from Edge himself, has been Randy Orton. It's not the most obvious thing as it sounds. Orton was not really phoning it in, as people keep saying in storyline that Orton doesn't put in a lot of effort. He does put in effort. He's not always as dialed in as he's been in this most recent rivalry with Edge, but he was not in his zone. He was not the Viper. He was not the Legend Killer, and most importantly, he was nowhere near to his career peak, which I consider to be 07 to 09, and most specifically 09. But Edge's return, as has been referenced in storyline in kayfabe as well, Edge's return triggered something in Orton, triggered him to raise his level again, and to really showcase all his entire repertoire. You don't always see that, and it took the return of Edge. Maybe it could have also happened with another storyline that Orton could really sink his teeth into, but Edge's return is probably what'll get Orton to have a really memorable back half of his career. He did mention in a recent interview, Orton did, that he might have another decade in the WWE, so I can safely say he's still in the back half, but not back quarter or anything of his career. Orton, ever since 09, excuse me, has not been a dominant heel. He's been a dominant babyface, especially since 2010 when he turned and he had that angle against John Cena, I believe. No, he won the title against Wade Barrett at Survivor Series, I think, in 2010. And then he had a babyface run until Miz defeated him, cashing in his Money in the Bank. But he's not been a dominant heel since 2009. Not really. Orton then had some 2018 run with the whole splitting Jeff Hardy's ear in half, being sadistic again, and that showed signs of what has proven to be an inescapable amalgamation, an irresistible, a perfect combination of IED Orton, which was 2009, intermittent explosive disorder Orton, and the Legend Killer. The Legend Killer, more in the sense of what he has achieved as an outcome, that is, as far as we know, killing the return story of Edge, the very emotionally charged babyface return story of Edge. So Orton has killed a legend in that sense. So in the promo that he cut today, he did mention that Orton is now experiencing the rebirth of the Legend Killer. That is amazing. Now I will get back to what has happened ever since Edge returned up to this point. I'm making this recording the night after Backlash. So after Raw, after Backlash. So Edge returned and Orton got betrayed by Edge. Edge threw Orton off the top rope. Over the top rope. The next night, Edge returns to Raw for the first time in 9.5 years. And he makes his claims and he tells a story of how he had 2 more procedures, one right after retirement and then another. And then he felt pretty good. I believe he appeared on an episode of Sheamus's Celtic Warrior workouts, and he had a wheelbarrow and he carried Sheamus jogging on the wheelbarrow. So Sheamus was on the wheelbarrow and Edge was carrying him uphill. And a lot of other really intense workouts. And you could just see that Edge still had his hair. I mean, that's not a very important detail, but he was still Edge. When you looked at him, you saw Edge. He had the intensity. He even had the expression in his eyes a lot of the times, even when he was working out. And he was still in Vikings. He had a really meaty storyline even in Vikings, which I was really happy to see when he turned heel in Vikings. I'm not sure if whoever is listening, I'm not sure if you guys have seen that portion, but I highly recommend it. For someone who had been in a significant drought in terms of Edge heel moments, that was a really satisfying arc in Vikings. So anyway, Edge did all of that, and then he returned. And on the night after the Royal Rumble, he narrated a story of how he had all these procedures, and he displayed his grit, as has been repeated over and over again, to the point of saturation, in my opinion, but that's besides the point. Edge was cutting this promo on Raw, bathing, or rather basking, in the glory that was rightfully his, especially after his not triumphant, but really amazingly successful return at the Royal Rumble, spearing people left and right, almost winning the damn thing. It was perfect. And he's rattling off names of people that he met at the Royal Rumble. There's Randy Orton, Seth Rollins, and Matt Riddle. All these people. Roman Reigns. And he says that now that he's back, he will probably see them down the line. And then out comes Randy Orton, teasing a reunion of Rated RKO, bringing up the emotional connection that Orton and Edge share in terms of Orton citing Edge being his figurative and in some cases literal savior. I'm not sure how real that portion of the story is, but it's believable. He said it so believably, I bought it. That Edge pulled him out of difficult situations when Orton was going through rough patches at certain points of his career. Edge was the one who was always there for him. And now Randy Orton was out for to offer Edge to reform Rated RKO. And then bam! RKO on Edge. And everyone is shocked. Orton takes off his jacket and brings out a chair, hits Edge on the back. I might miss some things because I'm not really seeing all of these things. I'm recalling all of this as this has happened since January to June, mid-June. The story that has unfolded in front of my eyes. Orton slams the chair on Edge's back. Edge sells it miraculously well, and Orton puts Edge's neck between the chair, as is custom in intense WWE angles, and Orton climbs the turnbuckle, teasing to stomp on the chair, thus, in kayfabe, breaking Edge's neck again, sending Edge back to the quote-unquote, well, no, not quote-unquote, but to the figurative obscurity from which he came back. And the indecision in Orton's eyes, the voices in his head, almost literally visible, but definitely a virtual crowd of voices around his head telling him to do some things while he's fighting with other voices in his head telling him not to do those things. And that was really expertly portrayed by Randy Orton. He doesn't stomp on the chair and doesn't break Edge's neck, but he goes outside of the ring, gets 2 chairs, performs a concerto on Edge to the complete disgust of the live audience, of the commentators, of everyone who happened to watch it then and since then. It was a really effective segment. Edge is taken away on a stretcher, and in the subsequent weeks you have this knowledge through rumors and dirt sheets that Edge has signed a 3-year contract, so he's going to be around, but he has limited appearances. So you have Matt Hardy come out and question Orton's actions. Hardy happened to call back on his feud with Edge, his very real feud with Edge over Lita, essentially, in 2005, which remains one of the most intense rivalries in the history of the WWE. If you haven't looked into it a lot, you should. It's amazing. It also has what I still consider to be the best promo of Edge's career, in which he tells Matt Hardy to be safe and sound so that Edge can prove once and for all that he deserves his main event stripes, and that Matt Hardy at that time was experiencing his 15 minutes of fame. I digressed, but I'll get back to the point now. Matt Hardy questioned Randy Orton about his motives, why he would attack Edge after Edge made a triumphant return from injury. And Orton could not offer an explanation, or didn't, and instead performed an RKO and concerto combination on Matt Hardy again. Next week, Matt Hardy and Orton are scheduled for a match. But of course Matt is not cleared to compete. His neck is in a brace, and Orton repeats this. He hits Matt Hardy not once, but twice with a concerto, the second of which is on the steel steps. Matt Hardy is written off of television, and he heads off to AEW to, I believe, happier pastures for him, and that's great. But Orton is building back pieces of his character that he had lost. There's a really good cut of a frame where Orton is walking back. I believe it's in the segment with Matt Hardy, the first one, where he's walking up the ramp. His entrance music is not playing at this point, but he stops at the end of the ramp, right at the stage, and his music starts playing. The whole, I hear voices in my head, and you can see his face, and his expression change, and he moves back. And that remains one of the more iconic images of this rivalry so far. So fast forward, you have Beth Phoenix coming back to Raw to make some sort of announcement or share how Edge's recovery is going. I mentioned in my opinion, Edge's best promo of his career. It's also debatable. Maybe I can make it top 3, that feud against Matt Hardy. Matt Hardy saying he wanted Edge dead, and Edge saying, no, you stay safe so I can beat you. But this Beth Phoenix segment, which Orton obviously interrupted, is, for me, the best promo of Orton's career. Probably even, safe to say, by far. Orton cites his and Edge's shared history, how Edge was the one who always looked out for him. They had camaraderie during Rated RKO, lots of similarities, lots of experience going up and down the roads, and how Orton believed that it was Beth Phoenix's fault that Edge returned, and that Edge was put through what Orton did to him. Orton blamed Beth Phoenix for enabling Edge's apparent obsession with the roar of the crowd, which is very evident when Edge makes his first return after 9 years from injury at the Royal Rumble. His eyes light up. His eyes are not just lighting up, he's nearly in tears. So these visuals come back to me, flash in front of my eyes when Orton is doing his promo. He calls Beth an enabler, blaming her for the fact that she did not stop Edge from making this return. And he said that if it had not been Orton, then someone else would have made a name for themselves at Edge's expense. And Orton caps it off by saying that Orton loves Beth. Orton loves Edge's 2 daughters more because, well, I'm sorry, I think I misspoke. Orton says that he loves Edge, and he loves Edge's daughters more than Beth ever could, because he is saving Edge. He's allowing Edge to be a father. Edge can go back to his life being a father, being a husband, because Orton has stopped Edge from making his in-ring return. The entire promo is a masterpiece. The intonations as well. You know, you just get these buzzwords of intensity and the passion, the fire in Orton's eyes. All those are true. But for me, if you're breaking down a promo, you have to cite instances. So most significantly, I think Orton, I could be wrong here, because this is just train of thought, but Orton goes, Edge is junkie for the roar of the crowd, and you did nothing to stop him. And that second nothing, with Beth also reacting very appropriately, just completely taken aback at the sheer volume of Randy's voice and the obvious blame that he's pointing toward her. And he apparently makes so much sense by saying this, that you enabled Edge to return when he shouldn't have, and I'm doing all of you a favor by putting Edge out of commission so he can return to being a family man. He says this with so much compassion that the audience somehow looks past Orton's obvious evil deeds of concertoing, I'm not sure if that's a verb, but I will make it a verb, concertoing Edge and Matt Hardy. The audience looks past this and starts cheering for Orton, sympathizing with his malicious motives, with this apparent positive final intention of returning Edge to his family. But of course it's diluted. But he said it with so much compassion that you believed that he believed what he was saying. Beth, of course, is really hurt by the proclamation that Orton loves her family more than she does. And she slaps Orton, and Orton just bends a bit forward, caressing his knees, almost laughing, I believe. I'm not sure. He wasn't laughing. No, he wasn't laughing. But he just gets, he takes on this scary demeanor. And he looks at Beth again, and Beth kicks him in the gut, and Orton RKOs her. leaving her laying in the ring to close out Raw. Next week, Edge is slated to return, and MVP is also involved in the segment because he is trying to recruit Edge as a talent that he will manage, which has led to great things for MVP, but that's not the point of this. So I won't talk too much about that. Edge drives to the arena, gets out, is looking very lean. He's in, I believe, polyester, body-hugging sports clothing, and he's marching out to the ring and calling Randy out. MVP makes a snide remark about Edge's wife, asking how Beth is doing after last week. Edge spears MVP in retaliation, and Orton takes this moment to perform a sneak attack and tries to get the better of Edge, but lo and behold, Edge performs the RKO on Randy Orton. Orton is able to escape before Edge can do anything related to chairs, and Edge very symbolically performs the concerto on MVP. I think of all the people who were the recipients of the concerto, I think MVP sold it the least. I think he did have a brace the next week, but anyway. So this set the stage up really well, and I believe this was the last Raw with a crowd, because after that you had Edge cutting a promo challenging Orton to a last man standing match. That's how he said it in his promo. With great storytelling skills. Edge's storytelling has probably gotten more consistent. People are saying that his acting has enhanced his promo ability. I believe that the ability was always there. It's just made it much more consistent. But Edge challenged Orton to a last man standing match. I really don't mean to make fun. It's just how I remember it. And Orton next week accepts this match, and then they have a little back and forth about the meaning of grit. Orton is cementing the fact that he knows Edge is not ready to return. He will not be able to return, and Orton, by defeating him in this last man standing match, will prove that to Edge, and Edge is just proving that he can still do this, and he will make Orton pay for trying to kill Edge's aspirations to return, and also obviously for Orton attacking his wife. So the motivations are really clear. The promos are exceptionally good. Every single promo, both of these absolute legends, it's thrown around really loosely in the industry, but these absolute legends, Edge and Orton, traded the best promo battle in the lead up to any WrestleMania match I have seen in years. No joke. It was the best storyline heading into WrestleMania. And up to this point, I think most of you, whoever listens to this, will agree with all of the praise I've showered on the creative, on the performance, everything. On the booking, even. It turns out that apparently Heyman, Orton, and Edge were at the forefront of the booking process, so big surprise that it was exemplary. So now WrestleMania is around the corner. The empty arena era is just in its infancy. And you have this match with a lot of expectations attached to it. Now, I have prefaced this entire thing by saying that it was my favorite. It was the best thing that could have happened to me as a wrestling fan of both these individuals. So I might be slightly biased here, but I also did this visualization exercise where I took both Orton and Edge away from this match, this last man standing match, and rewatched it as if they were not the people doing it, which is difficult because they perform spears and RKOs and concertos and the submission move, the anti-venom, which Edge broke out against MVP for the first time in his career. So all these moves that are very synonymous with them. But I did this exercise to prove to myself that I was not liking this last man standing match simply because it was just the two of them. but I sincerely believe that it was not too long. I think Orton has also gone on record saying that last man standing matches it was a last man standing match. It has to be long. And of course, because all the other matches were so short, both the title matches, the Blue Universal title and the WWE title match, were maybe 2, maybe 4 minutes long each. So I was just completely grateful, because for me, it really didn't matter who won. I realized that the story would probably beckon Edge to win the match, and given how emotionally charged the build-up was, that the last man standing stipulation was justified, even though I believe that they could have just had a wrestling match at that time, I thought they were just killing the feud with one match with the last man standing, and I selfishly, because of my personal reasons and fandom, wanted them to continue this program. I was to be pleasantly surprised. Spoilers ahead. But it was just a treat. I remember watching this match, and it was just the perfect culmination at that point, what I thought to be the culmination of everything. And people are not used to watching those matches, but I believe it was a professional wrestling match with the audio of a real fight. All the guttural utterances from both wrestlers, a lot of trash talking, just two wrestlers tasked with telling a story inside a performance center using not just the ring but the entire arena. And I believe personally, as objectively as I can, that it was goddamn beautiful in every way. I didn't get bored. That might be also my biases, but I don't think so. I think it was legitimately a great match, given the circumstances, given the task that they had in front of them to perform without fans at all, with just commentary. One thing that I will say, the commentary for this match was completely horrible. What the hell was going on? Oh, anyway, so other than that, I believe it was really good. And the right man went over. Edge won the match. It was really intense. Edge had a spot where he came crashing down onto Orton from a ladder, from a elevated platform that he reached via a ladder, and he jumped down, dropped an elbow on Orton, who was prone on a table. That was a memorable spot. And then they brawled in the gym, where Orton had that infamous choking spot with Edge being choked between two training ropes. That's the wrong technical term, I realize that. But those who watch the match know what I'm talking about. And then they were just fighting all over the place. And they finally finished over some storage containers, where on the way to which Orton also performed his draping signature DDT. Vintage Orton! And then Edge turns the tables, performs a spear, and also locks in the anti-venom. At that time, not named the anti-venom, but still anti-venom. And finishes Orton on top of a chair, and Edge has another chair in his hand. So the referee starts counting. The referee was really comical, by the way. His counts were really hilarious, which is even amplified further because it's a last man standing match. A lot of false counts are there, all the way to 10, and that guy could really count hilariously. Anyway, so the ref starts counting after Edge performs the anti-venom on Orton, and Edge goes, "Don't you effing count!" And then Edge hits the concerto, very poetically ending that portion of their story, and Orton loses. Edge emerges victorious at WrestleMania in his return match. It made all the sense in the world. The only sad thing for me was that Orton's WrestleMania record is so bad. It's 5-9, I believe, or 6-9. But that was a small price to pay. I thought it was perfect. Pretty much perfect, except for the commentary and the referee. Yeah, given the circumstances, it was perfect. I didn't think it was way too long. Then I believed it was over. I thought maybe Edge would start an angle with probably Seth Rollins. maybe AJ Styles, but AJ Styles was obviously taking some time off after being buried alive by The Undertaker in the Boneyard match. So it was all guesswork for me. And then Randy Orton and Edge had a rendezvous segment on Raw where Orton essentially just said that the right man won because you were the better man at WrestleMania, but the better wrestler did not win. And that led to the problematic tagging of their subsequent second match being billed. There's problematic branding of their second match as probably, in brackets, the greatest wrestling match ever. There are so many problems with that. The obvious ones being, who's to say what is the greatest? And you're never going to live up to expectations after saying that, hello, we are going to break every expectations and surpass and overcome all these expectations. Because people have a negation bias. They don't want, even if they do witness the greatest wrestling match ever, they will not accept it. The past, you cannot defeat history on the path to defeating history. It happens in hindsight. No one has ever said, I'm going to do the best thing ever, and then gone on to do the best thing ever. In wrestling, at least. And even if they did, it was not recognized as such, which is the point. At the same time, I realize why this was done. And not a lot of people would sympathize with me on this, and that is completely alright. Or rather, they wouldn't agree with me. But given what the match was. Okay, first I'll talk about the promos, and then I'll talk about the branding and why it made sense to me. The promos, again, they centered around doubt for Edge, because Edge won a match which symbolized and very directly demonstrated his grit and his ability now to never give up, and him digging down deep and just experiencing catharsis at every turn when he was punishing Orton at the Last Man Standing match. But now he was in doubt for the second match because it was a straight up wrestling match. Orton brought up the number of matches he's had, Edge brought up the number of wrestling matches Orton has had during the 9.5 years that Edge has been away. Being the source of his doubt, whether he can still do this in its purest form, whether he can still really wrestle. Orton echoes these sentiments and again harkens back to the number of matches he's had and says he will prove that he's the better wrestler while conducting interviews outside the storyline about the whole branding, which brings me back to the branding, which I will cover right after saying that the sheer quality of the promos, it is not that complicated. It is just you believing them. And I believed them. I really believed them at every turn. Edge was saying that he's going to try to be the better wrestler. That's all he can do. I believe that because it came from the heart. It looked as if it came from the heart. Orton saying that he believes Edge's claims to be willing to try, are absolutely pathetic. You believe that because Orton's character is so freaking good now. He's cocky. He is indecisive in his mind. He knows what he has to do, but he's constantly showing that he doesn't really want to do it, so he's conflicted at every turn. And Orton's character work here is fabulous. You can't really say that his character has ever been better written, better performed by him ever before. He is at his peak, according to me. He has rediscovered his peak ever since 2009. Maybe he won't ever get back to the exact dynamic, also look-wise, that he had. He looked like a complete viper with a bald head at that time. But right now, as far as character work and just personal confidence and the sheer ability that he's demonstrating at character work and also promos the presence that he has, it's unrivaled. It's absolutely unrivaled. Complementing Edge's absolute perfect storytelling ability on the mic as well. So the moving parts here are just perfect. Now I'll get back to the branding. I'm sorry, I missed out on the Christian segment. The Christian segment with Edge was also perfect. This is the segment in which Orton interrupted the peep show and just told the both of them that Edge's claims to want to try are pathetic. Christian says that without the fire that Edge, essentially this was the point of the segment, Christian taunted by saying that Edge, even in Edge's prime, could not perform a match which could be called the greatest wrestling match ever. So after a 9-year layoff, how the hell could he? He just can't. Christian says he does not believe in his best friend, and that lights a fire in Edge. And Christian says that was the whole point of him doing this, to bring out that fire in Edge, to reinvigorate that desire, that inner beast, if you will, in Edge. That was exemplary too. Now I apologize. I've been stalling. Now I finally get to the branding of the match itself. Why I understand the branding of this match is that it could be the most stupid match ever. It could be an absolute 2-minute squash match for either of the wrestlers, for either Edge or Randy Orton, and it would still carry the billing of the greatest wrestling match ever. What I'm trying to say is that a match billed as the greatest wrestling match ever is not going to be forgotten, whether for good reasons or bad reasons. The tag will always remain. And the tag has been the cause for a lot of grief for fans even after the match, which was beyond perfect. And I'll tell you why after just completing my bit on the branding. So, the greatest wrestling match ever, no matter how great or how bad it is always going to remain. People will never, most likely, encounter another match being billed beforehand as the greatest wrestling match ever. It created a really interesting dynamic where these two wrestlers, Edge and Orton, were fully aware that the branding of the event did not warrant being done. Branding of the match, it should not have been called the greatest wrestling match ever. Edge made a prank of it, and he had lots of tweets on Twitter about the greatest coffee ever. He was just demonstrating how ridiculous the whole thing was. But never before and never again will you see two wrestlers preparing for a match that has already been. Never before and never again will you see two wrestlers prepare for a match that has already been billed as the greatest wrestling match ever. And that is what was unique about this. Did it take away from what the match could have been remembered as? From what I've seen in reviews, yes. It has taken a lot away from the beautiful work that these two amazing wrestlers have done. In the minds of a lot of people, because they cannot ignore the billing, and I understand that. But here's the good part. For some people, it really was the greatest wrestling match. Why? Because some of these fans are new. Some of these fans have a very short memory. You can have all these dirt sheets and you can have all these smart fans who remember Austin and Bret Hart from WrestleMania 13, who remember Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, even more because of the Undertaker's recent amazing documentary. They can remember Undertaker, Shawn Michaels from WrestleMania 25, and you can have all these other great matches. Steamboat as well, Ric Flair, Steamboat. Those matches you will never forget them truly, but not a lot of people know about them. So a lot of people watching, because of not knowing of those matches, or even despite knowing, because of the novelty, because of the fact that such wrestling matches are not wrestled anymore on the WWE main roster. Out of just sheer respect for these two legends. For whatever the reason is, some people would actually, legitimately, remember this match as the greatest wrestling match ever. For all those reasons that I mentioned, and also because it was billed as such. So for casual fans, if you don't know how WWE branding works, and you just come across this event, Backlash, being billed as the site for what will be the greatest wrestling match ever, what will be, the tagline did not have the word probably or could be in it. If a casual fan looks at that, they go, okay, the greatest wrestling match ever is happening at Backlash, and it involves the returning Edge competing in his first straight-up wrestling match in almost a decade. And on the other hand, you have the Viper, the Legend Killer, Randy Orton. So that is marketing for you. And I believe a lot of people watched it, some people to prove their own negative biases correct, that, hey, this can't be, they can't live up to this. Some people watched it because, hey, it's the greatest wrestling match ever. Some people watched it because they really believed it could be the greatest wrestling match ever. The main point of any branding, of any marketing technique or strategy, is to get people to watch, and it did that. Now for the match itself. It could not have been better. Except for Edge not injuring himself. But that's besides the point. The match itself, I really don't know how this could have been better. And I might sound like a broken record just repeating what I said for WrestleMania 36, even though people said WrestleMania 36, The Last Man Standing, was way too long, and I can see why people believe that. There wasn't any crowd in attendance, and lots of guttural noises, storytelling and psychology heavy. So I can see why people didn't like WrestleMania 36, Last Man Standing between Edge and Orton. But the greatest wrestling match ever? See, that's what I'm also doing. I'm just going to call it that, even though it might not be. It might be. Who knows? It doesn't matter. But that is always what it will be remembered as, for good or bad reasons. In this Backlash match between those two, the storytelling was again heavy, and that is what I value more than anything else, than even high spots. I value well-timed high spots, but the storytelling, Edge being bested by Orton in the early going, in the rest holds, in the back and forth exchanging grapple holds, all of those things, and Edge trying to find his gear and finally outsmarting Orton with that big boot in the corner outside the ring. All those instances, coupled with Edge finally gaining steam and flooring Orton and going through the checklist in his mind of things that he could possibly pull out to surprise or overcome the sheer weight that he felt from Orton because of Orton being in the prime of his career and Edge not having wrestled an actual match in a decade. You can see that. You can feel that. When Edge sells any move that inflicted damage to his neck, Edge sells it as if it's real. That is where his acting has probably helped him a lot. I'm not sure if that is true, but I believe so. His selling is too realistic. From every person I've watched or heard talking about the match, or Edge's recent 2 matches, ever since he returned, singles, they've always gotten uncomfortable whenever Edge's neck is hurt. And that is amazing for as a critique on Edge's, as an assessment of Edge's body of work. He is selling that to perfection. And of course that is coupled with Orton's no absence of malice attitude, take no prisoners, dole out damage, dish out absolute carnage and punishment on the returning Edge to prove a point that he's the better wrestler and Edge shouldn't come back because he can't still go in the ring. The story was so heavy, and the psychology, in-ring psychology, was also very heavy. It was wrestled almost entirely in the ring. You had creative camera shots which made this feel a little staged and a little a bit too much heavy on showmanship. I would say that. And sometimes the crowd noises got a little overbearing for me as well. But just the sheer pacing, the segments, the portions of the match, not segments. The portions of the match were very very well segregated, and the transitions were smooth. The kickouts were believable. The one thing I will say, or two, even though I appreciated it, in general, I don't want to see the RKO kicked out of twice. Once is fine. Same with the spear. The spear was only kicked out of once, but it was two successive spears that were kicked out of. But maybe given the greatest wrestling match ever, it was warranted. Maybe I will change my instantaneous opinion. But the way it was done was perfect. So, it's not a critique on the match, it's a critique on the concept of RKOs and spears being kicked out of. They're rarefied finishers, signature moves. They should be protected. Not like Seth Rollins' stomp against the Fiend in Saudi Arabia. Jesus Christ. They butchered that move. Anyway, I also didn't mind Orton connecting with the Olympic Slam and then the pedigree, and of course also Edge trying the rock bottom. That made the least sense, which is the most justifiable target for criticism from every person who didn't like that, because Edge has no connection to The Rock, barely shared the ring with him. Orton has a connection with Triple H. Orton wanted to prove Kurt Angle wrong because Kurt Angle picked Edge to win the match, so there was some story there. And then you had the final back and forth. After Orton connected with his first RKO out of nowhere, Edge kicked out. Then Edge returned with a flurry of two spears. Orton kicked out. Edge also hit the execution, by the way, and Orton hit his signature rope hung DDT, draping DDT. Edge also pulled out the Edge-O-Matic. He was about to go for the Educator, and I really appreciated that everyone kept a track of that. Everyone was aware what was going on and what the moves were called. It was not just the Impaler DDT, it was the Execution. And when Edge went for the Sharpshooter / Educator, Tom Phillips knew what the hell was happening. Edge also hit the Unprettier, which is the kill switch by Christian, so there's also continuity there, or you can say justifiably that Edge should have or could have performed that move, and he did, so it makes sense. As a side note, Samoa Joe on commentary, delicious. Absolutely freaking amazing. How did people not realize that earlier? His timing, his intonation again, his volume control, and his insights are razor sharp and accurate. It was a pleasure. He really helped this match as well. Final sequence. Orton can't get the job done, and Edge has taken a moment to lock in the anti-venom. It has been called the anti-venom by Christian in that segment before Backlash. The anti-venom. And it seems like Orton is really flustered. He's looking for ways to get out of that move. He just can't. He's about to fade, and the move is going to cost him the match like it did at WrestleMania. Only, with the referee immediately behind him and Edge immediately in front of him, Orton goes low. Orton hits Edge with a very inconspicuous, almost inconspicuous, almost imperceptible to the spectator low blow. Edge falls to the corner. Orton seizes his moment, goes to the adjacent corner of the ring, and connects with the first punt kick you have seen, probably since Survivor Series 2013. It is amazing, and Orton pins Edge for the 1, 2, 3. Edge's eyes are fixed at the ceiling, I would believe, of the Performance Center. Orton is whispering into Edge's ears, continuing the main storyline, that you can go back now. And when you do, tell Lyric, tell Ruby, and tell Beth that Uncle Randy says hi. And Orton does his traditional poses. Orton has given a proper FU to Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels for picking Edge. Ric Flair has been proven correct. Ric Flair is apparently in attendance for this match. Orton has capped off the greatest wrestling match with the punt, the return of the goddamn punt kick, the most protected finishing move probably ever. More than Big Show's right hand, more than the tombstone, more than the pedigree, more than Sweet Chin Music, more than the damn RKO, more than anything, more than the Claymore probably as well. It's just fantastic, just perfectly scripted. The match was perfectly performed. Of course, it was taped, so they had the chance to do it. Apparently, Edge tore his triceps during one of the retapes. So that is the story coming out of yesterday, and now we finally arrive at today. The Raw, slated to start with Orton coming out to maybe give his thoughts on the match, presumably. So he comes out looking very smug, completely perfectly portraying the character he is now, who knows what he has to do and has control over the voices in his head, even though he's not ignorant of them. He knows how to control the voices in his head, but he does not, those voices are not lost on him. He just knows what he has to do in spite of those voices. Orton comes out and he says that he proved all the others wrong, and he did what he had to do. He got the job done, and Edge can now go back now that Orton has killed the triumphant return of Edge and written the last chapter of their rivalry. Christian comes out, says that Edge will be back and will get his revenge on Orton. This is not the last chapter. And Orton, with a very sneaky, I would say, but with a very clever segue, just goes, no, that's not what you want. You're not protecting your friend. I know what you really want. You want one last match. Harking back to Orton's feud with Christian, at the time with Christian as a heel, chicken shit heel, and Orton as a dominant babyface, where Christian was constantly asking for one more match. So Christian is not medically cleared, and he is not an active competitor. He is still retired, but Orton challenges Christian to an unsanctioned match, where if something bad happens, the performer cannot hold the company responsible for any damages, etc., etc. It's like an indemnity bond, I believe. So, Ric Flair is also there. Ric Flair is trying to apologize to Christian, and Ric Flair is trying to play the good guy, that, I cannot believe this is happening. I'm really sorry you got caught in the middle of this. And Orton is in the prime of his career. He's firing on all cylinders, and Christian, you are not ready for this. And Christian is just emotionally drained, and he wants to fight for his best friend. And all of those things are going through Christian's head, especially that now that it's been made public that Edge tore his triceps and went under the knife and will now be out of action for months. So Christian agrees to this match. Ric Flair tries to talk him out of it, giving the impression of Flair's apparent benevolent intentions. And then the match begins. Orton makes his entrance after Christian, and they're both in the ring about to square off, and who enters? Ric Flair. Ric Flair gets in the ring. He begs Christian and Orton to not do this, essentially. But Christian just pulls Rick to the side, and he says, I need to do this, Rick. And with his back turned to Ric Flair and focused on Randy Orton, who is just standing there with his jacket intact, Orton is just the picture of serenity, of malicious serenity. And Ric Flair nails Christian with a low blow from behind. Christian falls over, hunches forward, and Orton punts Christian. Christian is knocked out. Orton slouches down, covers Christian's shoulders, very, almost intimately. 1, 2, 3. Orton again says, I didn't want to do this, but what are you doing here? Christian, it's your fault. Barking at an unconscious Christian, blaming Christian for triggering Orton's actions, activating Orton, making Orton do this, blaming the victim for deserving the attack. Orton apologizes. At the start of the show, Orton thanked Edge for setting the stage for the return of the Legend Killer as an outcome of Edge being figuratively killed off. And now Orton apologizes to Christian that he harmed Christian. He didn't want to. When the medics are right besides the apron, Orton, who is still delivering this monologue to Christian, apologizing and everything, he beckons the medics to have a quick look at Christian to really ensure Christian's well-being, or ensure that Christian gets the perfect care, all the care that he can to mend his neck, to bring him back to health as soon as possible. This conflicted Orton is, as I've previously mentioned, is the perfect amalgamation of Legend Killer, IED Orton from 2009, and the Viper, just traditional Viper Orton. It's the best, and Orton should not ever go back to being a face ever again. Absolutely not. It is so perfect the way it is. There's nothing wrong with it. And now that Edge is going to be gone, Orton has so much momentum as a dominant, confident, sadistic, destructive heel. I am glad Edge is back. And I'm glad that Edge will be back to hopefully partake in another match with Randy Orton to cap off what would be a perfect trilogy of matches, to cap off this amazing rivalry. And I'm glad that Edge's return has sparked this thing inside Orton, this drive to be sadistic, to chew through the entire roster, to lay a string of bodies in his wake, leave a string of bodies in his wake. And I cannot wait to see what's next for Randy Orton. And I wish Edge a very speedy recovery. And I want to wish both of them, and I want to thank both of them, Edge and Orton, for the greatest wrestling match ever. Which, in the 44 minutes and 42 seconds that it was going on for, it was. This is something that I will hopefully continue again, and it has been a complete privilege to do this at 6 a.m. in the morning. Until next time, this is a rated RKO tribute, a privilege for me. This is Duncan Lievi, talking about wrestling. Lievi on wrestling. Until next time.